Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our session on the power of law. How are you doing? How's the energy? It's late in the day. There's been a lot of sessions. I'm going to start off by trying to get your attention. And I want everyone to put your hands in the air. Everyone to put one hand in the air. And I want you to think about how the law and legal systems impact on you and your personal life. And I want you to give me a show of fingers. Number one finger would be, you never really think about the law and legal systems. And number 5 would be, this dominates every moment of your waking life. 2, 3, 4 would be in the middle. Show me. Okay, we have some 2s, some 3s, some 5s from the panelists. It should be a few 4s. Interesting to see the cultural nuances, the Germany-based people, the France-based people. So, this session, right now, and to move to a more somber note, across the world right now, we're witnessing a real rollback of basic freedoms. Rise in authoritarianism, dangerous, worrying weakening of the rule of law. Great writer Naomi Klein described this as our critical moment in history. And also in this critical moment in history, we're seeing legal systems used in bold and beautiful ways to challenge governments and corporations, give voice to people who've been denied agency and nature itself. We've got a brilliant lineup of people from across civil society, indigenous leaders, who are going to talk us through the power of law and how that can be used to protect people and planet. So to open this session, I'm really excited to introduce someone who really stands in the face of power and speaks the truth. As Secretary General of Amnesty International, she's a real fearless advocate for international law as a tool of protection and justice. Welcome to the stage, Agnes Callamard. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, even though the topic is not necessarily very joyful. The rule of law is under attack. The principle-based durable means by which public power is made accountable, is obliged to respect norms, is restrained from overreach. That rule of law today lies battered, mocked, trampled on, internationally betrayed, and nationally eroded. Even in the richest countries, those with the resources for social stability, economic predictability, those that long ago prided themselves on their independent judicial institution, clear separation of power, governments and elite are intentionally attacking the rule of law. And on the global stage, the same architect of the rule-based order that arose out of the ashes of World War II, out of the ashes of the Holocaust, in fact 80 years ago, those very architects are now dismantling the legacies, dismantling what they constructed 80 years ago. The Genocide Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention for Women, Convention Against Racial Discrimination, and the UN Charter, and many more. I hear some of you, I'm having problems with my phone. I hear some of you suggesting that maybe this attack is recent, that maybe it's only 100 days old. But no, sadly, it is not. China's action against the people of Hong Kong has been years in effect, being imposed now through a new legal framework, a rule by law that violates the rule of law. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, now 3 years old, an ongoing blatant violation of the UN Charter that underpin the international rule-based order. And of course, were it not for the full support of the United States and acquiescence of other Western governments, Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza could not have been perpetrated. Just 3 examples from 3 members of the UN Security Council. I could have cited examples from Sudan, Myanmar, DRC, Afghanistan, other examples where states arbitrarily claim universal standard and international law do not apply to them, do not apply to their special circumstances, whereby using the UN Security Council veto, the world's most powerful state shield themselves from accountability. And the accumulation of all that is that by 2025, international law and the rule of law globally is on its knee. The rule of law, bending knee to power, as power seeks to set itself above the law. So surely you're going to tell me, okay, that's all about territorial competitions, territorial grab, military occupation. Surely the breakdown of the rule of law cannot apply to climate, cannot apply to that existentialist threat. Well, think again. First, as a segue, let me highlight the fact that war causes long-term environmental damage and that armed conflict around the world account for 6% of annual greenhouse emission worldwide. Let me highlight that Ukrainians are accusing Russia of committing the crime of ecocide, and that Palestinians are accusing Israel of doing exactly the same. But returning to climate and the rule of law, the 10-year-old Paris Agreement was hailed as a success, and it was a success. I remember the day when it was adopted, and it was already in an era where we were not expecting multilateral instrument to deliver anything, and it did. But I was at Davos this January, when the US announced yet again that it was withdrawing from that agreement and revoking its financial commitment to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Shockingly, and I don't know whether anyone else was at Davos, shockingly but not surprisingly, many at Davos saluted the decision, corporate actors, and indeed some government, explaining that climate regulation had gone too fast. There were too many of them, and really they were too burdensome. Too fast. Severe drought, catastrophic flooding, fire infernos, intense storm, rising sea level, killing more with each passing year, forcing people to flee their home. Too fast. 2024 was the world hottest on record. And I was at COP2. And at COP29, we watched with horror and with 1,770 fossil fuel lobbyists, states failing to make any progress to reduce our fossil fuel dependency. Too many regulations. Donald Drill, baby drill Trump, did not just withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement. He has gutted America's domestic climate policies, slashed spending for clean energy, undermined funding for solar and wind projects, eviscerated decades of work to protect Americans from corporate abuses of the environment. What's more, his administration is now targeting environmental groups across the country, freezing funding, threatening their tax status, and indeed victimizing, criminalizing groups such as Habitat for Humanity. So you're going to tell me that the US, surely the rest of the world is a little bit more sensible. Surely elsewhere climate activists are protected by the rule of law, by the power of law. Surely elsewhere their work are respected. Well, dear friends, not at all. Instead, for climate matters across the world, the rule of law has become far too often the rule by law. Hastily enacted laws, arbitrarily applied policies target environmental activists, seeking to silence them, to prevent their action, to stymie their critique. Climate activists in Europe increasingly face criminalization, stigmatization. The French government ordered the dissolution of les soulèvements de la terre, which a court later found to be unlawful. The rule of law worked on that case. The UK passed draconian legislation to specifically target environmental activists by criminalizing some of their tactics of protest. In Germany, laws used against the Red Army, you're too young, most of you, to remember. Laws used against the Red Army are used against environmental activists now. Yet, even so, across the globe, people are defiantly demanding that politicians take action against climate collapse. Do they disturb and disrupt? Yes, of course. Yes, of course, they do. But their civil disobedience is a right and a central dimension of how we are making our voice heard. So yes, they must disrupt. It is how non-elite voices are amplified. It is how governments can be held accountable. It is how power can be made to course correct. But instead of upholding, celebrating the civic engagement, the solidarity that is being demonstrated, around the world, climate activists are derided, ostracized, abused, stigmatized, as if somehow terrorists. They are also killed in their dozens upon dozens. The largest number of killed human rights defenders in the world are environmental and climate activists. The largest number. Defending the climate can be a death toll for you. This is the rule of law we are confronting. The law is being turned upside down, used against the very people it is designed to protect, by the very people it was designed to restrain. Of course, there is more to this story than weaponization of the law alone. There are many examples, and we will hear more, of people like many of you grabbing the law and trying to make the law work for us and for the environment. In 2022, the UN General Assembly declared that access to a clean and healthy environment is a universal human right, underscoring a determination that international law and our global institutions be made fit for the purpose. Just a year ago, the European Court for Human Rights issued landmark climate decision, finding that the Swiss government had not complied with the European Convention when it failed to set and meet clear limits on greenhouse gas emission. Last year, thanks to the vision and courage of a coalition of youth in the Pacific Island and Vanuatu, a country on the front line of the climate crisis, the International Court of Justice has held an historical hearing on the human rights obligation of state vis-à-vis climate change. And by the end of 2024, there were 86 climate lawsuits that had been filed against the world's largest fossil fuel producers. Many of them are headquartered on this continent. Is that enough? Is that enough? Well, I think you have the answer already. That is not enough. It is not even enough to meet the Paris Agreement at the rate we're going, of the 1.5 degrees. So, not enough to prevent preventable death, not enough to prevent thousands of people to flee their home and lose everything, and it is certainly not enough to meet the heightened challenge we are confronting. Climate deniers in power, in the most powerful countries in the world, emboldening the many, many other would-be powerful climate deniers, emboldening the many, many more who, with utter disregard for future generations, continue their same greedy, selfish, nihilistic pursuit of endless growth and unsustainable profit margins. So it is not enough. So what can we do? I hear, and I've heard yesterday and today here, that we need less doom and more hope. Yeah, I think, I wish I could provide less doom. And I said too that to deserve hope, we must act with courage. First, what shreds of meaningful hope there are will be found only in meaningful action. And for that, we must first act brave and braver. Braver in our resistance, more visionary in our transformative demands, and more courageous in our joint action. Dear friends, we must resist. Resist. In our lifetime, never has there been a more important time on a global scale to resist and to disrupt. To resist the attacks on human rights by speaking up for truth, for science, for evidence, and for the rule of law. To resist and disrupt the false narrative, the failed idea, and the appalling double standards that have become the hallmark of our times. To resist the dehumanization, the hard-hearted calculus of so-called tolerable harms. To resist and disrupt by speaking truth to power. To engage in civil litigation. To demand laws criminalizing climate activists be repealed. To demand that standards protecting the environment be implemented. To come together to better document, report, publicize what they are doing to our environment and to our life. And if we are privileged enough to live in a place where speaking up is not yet criminalized, we must use our rights to protect the rights of others. We must demand protection by the rule of law against intimidation by rule of law. And if resistance is not enough, and it won't be, we need to transform. We need to transform by demanding that states meet their obligation to future generations, by imposing necessary restriction on the unsustainable use of natural resources. We must demand changes to the global taxation system to prevent the current annual loss of $500 billion to tax abuse, so that those funds can be invested where they are needed for mitigation,
Agnes,
for protection. We need to demand that universal income be guaranteed, to support all those facing loss of income, employment, because of the digital industrial revolution. We must demand that the way we measure human progress be shifted away from GDP towards metrics that focus on equality, dignity, sustainability. We must demand that international governance be transformed. We must demand an end to the use of veto by Security Council members in issues related to peace and security. That's a journey of 1,000 steps that begins with just one, the step of courage. You'll hear you need hope. I'm telling you, you need courage, you need to stand up, and you will find hope in acting, in action, in resisting, in disrupting. The courage to resist, to defy, and to transform. That is what is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. It's fantastic.
Sorry, it was...
No. Thank you so much, Agnes, for speaking truthfully and forcefully about the steps we need to take and to start them with courage. Before we begin our panel, I'd like to invite you just for a 5-second reflection. I would like you to picture in your mind a place in nature that you love. Maybe a waterfall, a mountain, coastline, a river. Now imagine that that place has no rights, no legal protections. It exists only to be exploited. That's the legal reality for almost all of the natural world. And we're going to bring together now to the stage 3 people who are changing this reality, giving legal protections to planet Earth. Let me introduce Jojo, Mehta from Stop Ecocide, Adam Weiss from Client Earth, and Marine Calmet from Wild Legal. Okay, welcome. How are you doing? So, we're going to start with a bit of a whirlwind tour of all of your work, short and sharp. I'm going to start with you, Adam. And so you and Client Earth, key players in environmental litigation, the law to protect life on Earth. I'm also going to share a small quirky fact about each of them to make it lighter. Fact about Adam. Despite this work, he's not a nature guy at all. He prefers the concrete jungle of Brussels and is a Frenchman in disguise behind his American accent, which you're going to see in a minute. Adam, share some more about what you're doing with Client Earth.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Client Earth is an NGO using the power of law to restore balance between people and the planet. We're trying to make a world in which everything every country does and everything every company does can be measured against whether it's compatible with environmental protection. And if it isn't, we can stop it.
Nice. Oh, that was short and sharp, wasn't it? Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. And moving to Marine, and I think when we came in our preparatory call, we realized such amazing synergies between you. So Marine, you and Wild Nature, 100% dedicated to the rights of nature. Personal fact about you, you've planted more trees than any of us will with your hands, especially oaks, your favorite, which you call your sacred link to Earth, and working on some super critical issues right now, including the rights of the River Seine in Paris. Tell us a little more about Wild Legal, how you're doing that, where are you up to at the moment?
So, hi everyone. With Wild Legal, we came to the conclusion that environmental law in France will not be sufficient to meet the ecological challenges of our century, as it reduces nature to natural resources, to ecosystem services, to commodities. And we are tolerating, sometimes even encouraging, through law, the destruction of our vital ecosystems. We are encouraging extractive and industrial activities that are fundamentally incompatible with the functioning and the restoration of life. So inspired from the victories in Ecuador, in New Zealand, in Spain, in many other countries in the world, we founded White Legal to teach and disseminate the principle of this movement in order to spark a cultural shift, a transition in our legal imagination to reconcile humans and other than humans. So in 2022, we launched a nationwide experimental program to develop and test legal solutions based on rights of nature and in collaboration with pioneers all around France. And on the Seine, you mentioned it, the progress has been really significant because we convinced the city of Paris to follow us, and the city even took a declaration that is now recognizing the Seine as a citizen of the city, and a citizen process is now underway. So this could lead to a legislative acknowledging of the rights of the Seine. It's already the case in many other countries, in Ecuador, in Peru, on the Marañón River, in New Zealand on the Wanganui River, on the St. Lawrence in Canada, there is also procedure. So today we are supporting 25 sites of exploration where we organize in a couple of weeks a symposium in the National Assembly in France, where we will present this work to show that things are moving and to prepare our lawmakers, the parliamentary elected people, to the inevitable arrival of this issue on their desk. So just a word, we must all be ready to change the law, to defend the rights of nature, to defend human rights, which are one and the same fight. So for the dignity and integrity of our living environment, we have to step up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I love that, transforming our legal imagination. And if anyone had pictured the Seine as your place in nature, maybe it would have had some rights as a citizen. Okay, Jojo, onto you. Stop Ecocide International, making mass environmental destruction an international crime. And personal fact about you, from a small town in the west of England, Stroud, which is a bit of a seedbed for activism, revolutionary movements. We've had Extinction Rebellion, Stop Ecocide International, and Global Citizens Assembly coming out of Stroud. Something in the water there? I've heard you describe Ecocide law as a Swiss Army knife for environmental protection. Tell me what you mean by that. What's your work? How far have you come?
Yeah, I'd actually like to express the complementarity with what Marine talked about with the rights of nature. Because criminal law is the kind of protective complement to the rights sphere. And a really simple way to express that is our basic human right, of course, is the right to life. But what protects our right to life is that if you take it away, that's a crime. It's murder. And ecocide, if you like, is the criminal law that protects the rights of nature, as indeed it protects the human right to a clean and safe environment. And what ecocide law aims to do is to name the very worst harms as serious crimes. And what that does is it helps in that cultural shift that we're talking about, because it creates a level of accountability and a level of seriousness. There are plenty of environmental laws around the world, but there's no real moral stigma in a company breaching a regulation. Indeed, it's often budgeted for. But when you have a serious criminal liability that could actually sit on the shoulders of a director, you have a very, very different level of deterrence. So that gives you a sense of the idea behind it. But to give a very brief sense of where we're at in progressing this law around the world, 5 years ago, there were no governments publicly talking about ecocide law. Now, we have a European Environmental Crime Directive with which all the EU countries will need to harmonize, which criminalizes some conduct comparable to ecocide. It's not perfect, but it's a big step. At the International Criminal Court, there's a multi-state proposal to amend the Rome Statute, which is the governing document of that court, to add ecocide to the list of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. And there are a number of proposals being taken forward in many countries and that have already been adopted to greater or lesser extents in a number of countries, including France and Belgium. So that just gives you a sense of what our organization is instrumental in propelling. We are not the legislators, but we are the ones that support states to move forward with that legislation and foster the conversation in civil society to create a safe space for those legislators to step into.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. So obviously a red thread throughout this law that needs to be fit for the planetary crisis. We also, in our preparatory chat, we talked about current laws being written to dominate nature, and that we need laws that place us within nature. What reforms, revolutions do we need, not just in our environmental law, but in how we think about government, accountability, and rights? Whoever feels the urge. Adam, I can see you look like you have an answer for this.
I do have the urge on this one. What we need is to put the environment at the same level that we put human rights in our constitutions. We need to make sure that it is the fundamental responsibility of states to ensure that there is a planet that we can live on and that future generations can live on. And human rights really is the model here. Agnes was talking about the system that was brought in after the Second World War, which made it possible in so many countries to challenge state action. You can go to court because states are not respecting your rights. If you go to government departments here in France, all across Europe, and many other countries, there are human rights officials who are vetting laws and policies and actions to make sure that they're compatible with our rights, which is exactly what they should be doing for the environment. That's what that law looks like. Our entire economy and society and civilization is embedded in nature. So everything that states do has to be compatible with making sure that nature is still there for us, and the same for companies. And so we're starting to see this, for example, with what's called corporate sustainability due diligence legislation. But basically the idea that we hold companies accountable for making sure they're not having adverse impacts on that natural world in which our entire economy is embedded and in which humans can't survive anymore if it goes away.
I wanted to quote a report that is about transformative changes, because it's not just about law. Law is the fiction, the text, but inside of the law there is a whole imaginary. And it's a report from the IPBES. I'm sure you all know about this, the platform of international experts on biodiversity. It was sent out on December from last year, and it's fascinating because the experts are pointing out that the approaches implemented so far to protect biodiversity have failed to halt or reverse the decline of nature. They say most past and current approaches to conservation aim to reform, but not to transform our existing systems. And yet, transformative changes are defined as a fundamental, system-wide reorganization. So for this, we need law. The report highlights also 3 major challenges that we have to collectively face to tackle the cause of biodiversity loss. One is the disconnection between people and nature, the cultural disconnection. The second is the concentration of power and wealth. And that's exactly what we see, what's happening in the US. In the third one is the prioritization of short-term individual and material gain, because it's incompatible with life. So the rights of nature addressed at least 2 of these challenges. That's very important. The reconnection with nature and the reconstruction of institutions capable of embracing new value systems in pursuit of a life in harmony with nature, a just and sustainable world where all forms of life can thrive.
Okay, thank you. Forceful words, and I think, yeah, a lot in common about the disconnect, disharmony between humans and nature, law and nature. You also touched on some of the challenges there. I want to look at another one of those challenges. One thing we mentioned in the intro, Ecuador, New Zealand, many countries adopting rights of nature laws. And this implementation is obviously very different if according to the region where it is. In France and Ecuador, for example, how do we make sure, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this first, Jojo, that we aren't looking at this through always a Western lens? How do we decolonize a little this space and international law around it?
That's a really good question. And actually, it's been very interesting to us that what's happening at the moment in terms of the Ecocide law conversation is that we're finding that a lot of countries in Africa and in Latin America are very interested in developing this law. And we can see a couple of reasons for that. One is that it actually depends on the definition. So with your permission, I'll just let you know what the international definition of ecocide is that's been put forward at the International Criminal Court. And it's very concise. It fits on the back of a business card. And if you're dealing with a busy politician, I can't tell you how useful that is. They often don't have time to read a 20-page report. So ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, actually, if you're familiar with that legal arena, it will be familiar language, but it's also very straightforward language, easy for you or I to understand. But the real point I want to make here is it focuses on consequences. And this is something, or risk of consequences as well, but this is something that people can relate to, I think, very intuitively in the context of criminal law. I'm going to use the murder example again. You're not a murderer because of how you kill someone. You're a murderer because they end up dead. And that is the principle that is in this definition. It's not about specific lists of prohibited acts. It's about how severe the damage is that is created. Now, what is the relevance of this to, the global south, to regions that are still developing? The important thing is what this law is not saying is you are not allowed to do X, Y, or Z. What it is saying is whatever you do, it should not create a severe level of harm. Now, actually, that is a very simple, common sense concept that politicians the world over can understand. It's common sense. I've yet to have anybody say to me, no, that level of harm should not be a crime. I mean, it feels very, very intuitive. But it also creates recourse and accountability for those countries against predatory foreign investment. So that is one of the principal reasons that they're interested. Another reason is actually what they are saying by putting this in place, what they are saying to the world. What they're saying to the world is, we know how to do this safely. And safety is such a fundamental issue now. We've heard again and again about what a dangerous situation that we're in. Ecocide law provides that kind of outer railing, if you like. And those countries are feeling this very acutely. The champions of this law are in inverted commas, the victim states. Vanuatu at the front line of climate change, Ukraine at the front line of environmental damage in wartime, Democratic Republic of Congo with one of the biggest rainforests in the world, wanting to protect its biodiversity. So those are some of the thoughts that come in response.
Thank you. So simplicity, universality to an extent with this. Adam, I know you work a lot on Client Earth with this as well. What would you say?
Absolutely.
Did that resonate?
It resonates really strongly. This question of how to decolonize environmental law is fundamental. And when you think about decolonization, the thing you have to think about first is, how did we get here, and what are the power relations that exist? So Europe is a wealthy place and a powerful place because of a history. And that gives us a situation, an opportunity, a responsibility as we look at the laws in this part of the world going forward, to see not only how they take Europeans into that safe space for humanity, that donuts, the Kate Raworth's idea, where we're no longer outside of our planetary boundaries, but we're also providing a dignified life for everyone. How do we do that not only for ourselves, but given our powerful position here in Europe, how do we do that so it brings the rest of the world with us? We have to stop cleaning up Europe at the expense of other parts of the world, and instead have laws that clean up Europe and clean up the rest of the world at the same time. And that actually means learning from what the legal systems in other parts of the world have to offer. You mentioned some legal systems that have an enormous amount to teach us, and recognizing fundamental, you mentioned universality, a universal legal principle that I see in the Constitution of Ecuador, in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, in the Constitution of China, is this principle of, in Europe we call it environmental integration, that the environment should be integrated into every policy and every law. In China, they call it ecological civilization. In Ecuador, it's called Pachamama, the principle of nature, that is fundamentally the same. And how do we make that operational in our legal systems here to show how it can be operational around the world?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. And Maureen, I saw you nodding there, so I'm also going to let you come in because this feels like such a critical point.
Yes, because in the rights of nature movement, there are so many forms that the legal model is taking according to different countries, culture, histories, and it's a civil society movement. So it looks like the people who take it as an instrument to have hope for future and to fight with the power of law. And I just wanted to quote the thought of Vandana Shiva on this, because you talk about diversity of cultural system, values, and Vandana Shiva, because she fights for the land, for the people, for the peasants, for the soil, she's saying our actual legal system is a monoculture. It's the same, we harmonize, and so it's fragile because it can be disrupted from the outside. And if the pest or a disease comes, the whole crops are dead. Everything is dead, even the soil. And we need a permacultural legal system that has complexity, diversity, that is resilient, that comes from the outside, from the bottom, from the ground. That's why rights of nature is for me such a force to think about how complexity is not a barrier, not something that is negative, but actually that comes from the inside and that protects us all as a community.
Amazing, thank you. And thinking about law as permaculture. Bet you have not done that before. Thank you. Last bigger question. I mean, Agnes, for us, painted quite a bleak picture of where we're at in the world right now, and also a truthful picture. We're seeing really, truly concerning political shifts in the US, executive orders, etc. In the EU also, attempts to dilute climate commitments. How can all this work? How can legal structures become resilient against these crazy political pendulum swings? And what role can international law play when national laws are really falling short? Who would like to take that one? Go for it.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, in this landscape, I think, I mean, we're each bringing different aspects of it, but I do think law can provide some hope in this context. With Ecocide law, it's very much about the foundational piece, the sort of setting of the baseline, the moral line, because you know, when it comes down to it, the problem that we face, as Agnes set out, is really a deeply cultural problem, and Maureen's also outlined this. And criminal law has a particular strength as a lever in that arena because it taps into what we consider acceptable and not acceptable. So effectively, when you criminalize something, you're saying, as a culture, we don't accept it. And I think that the point we're coming to now is actually sort of the next big shift. I mean, if you look look at the abolition of slavery, you look at votes for women, civil rights, these big shifts that have brought society forward. And I think that the sort of legal shift around the environment is what is this century's version of that. And it happens in a kind of almost I think of it as a crossover. The awareness of the need for that baseline of this is not acceptable, which actually is kind of in our guts already. It has to be at a certain point for the legislators to move on it, but the whole culture doesn't have to be there yet. But once the crime is in place, then because once something is criminal, it has that impact, that sort of cultural moral stigma, if you like, that then spreads across the culture more broadly. So I think we are approaching that point. And I'm just going to give a very tiny story that someone once told me, that a Chinese emperor once commanded a palace to be built that was so big that in the nighttime you couldn't see a candlelight in the middle, and he couldn't do it. And I think that image is lovely because it shows that, it's that thing of always better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And I feel like these aspects of environmental law are those candles.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And great to have that candle and hope amidst the doom. Love the idea that the legal shift for nature could be this century's abolition of slavery. I love the ambition there. And it's on that note that I'd like to wrap us up. I'm going to give you each 1 minute to close for us, 60 seconds each. And I'd like to do something a little different with this close. I would like you to complete this sentence for me. And the sentence will be, future generations will thank us if our legal systems ... What they do, what they become, you choose how to interpret that. Adam, kick us off.
Future generations will thank us if our legal system solves this crisis and tells them how to prevent it coming back. The law is a really powerful tool for passing on wisdom to future generations about how to deal with society's, humanity's biggest problems. And as Jojo said so eloquently, this is our biggest problem. We use the wisdom of past generations in our laws to deal with our most significant problems. We now have to pass this on to the people who will be here hundreds of years from now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah. Maureen.
Much shorter. Future generation will thank us if the law system is capable of weaving new alliances with other than humans. And I think that's the most important cultural shift we have to face in the next coming years.
Thank you, Maureen.
And very simple for me as well. Future generations will thank us if the legal systems acknowledge that mass damage to the living world, to people and to the ecosystems that sustain us, is simply not acceptable. That will be looked back on as a kind of no-brainer. Why on earth did it take them that long?
Yes, thank you. That is the courage, the ambition that we need to make this shift. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the perspectives. Thanks. Thanks, Adam. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so talking from a quite meta perspective on nature, legal systems, we're now really honored to hear from a leader whose community lives at the front line of this global legal and ecological battle. I'd love to invite to the stage Kaisiki Ninawa Hunikui, a chief of the Hunikui indigenous people. Hi, welcome. Welcome. Thank you. And it's my real privilege to invite Princess Alessandra Silvestri von Bismarck, who will be translating and who has been involved in indigenous issues since 1988. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so Chief Ninawa, real strong advocate for centering indigenous rights, livelihoods in the climate agenda. Bem-vindo novamente.
Gracias.
Welcome again. We're really deeply honored to have you with us today. I know it's been a long journey, crazy schedule, and now everyone wants to speak to you. Why is it important for you to be here at ChangeNOW today, and what message are you bringing for us?
O que é importante para você estar aqui agora e qual mensagem você quer passar para o povo que está aqui?
Ok. Bom, quero dizer que estou muito feliz de poder estar neste evento com um tema muito importante, né? Soluções agora.
He's very happy.
Try again. Yep, okay.
Hi. He's very happy to be here, and he thinks it's a very important event talking about a very important matter.
E dizer para as pessoas que estão nos ouvindo, que estão presentes, que o mundo está precisando dessa união.
He would like to let everybody knows here, hearing him, that the world is really in need of this kind of reunion.
E olha que tema também tão importante do que estavam falando sobre, né, a lei do ecocídio. Então, a gente precisa criar estratégia de poder unir a humanidade em torno de um bem comum.
That will be ideal to unify humanity around a very important climate change laws and, put everybody together. It will be ideal to get international laws that unify all the people in this thematic.
Bom, eu viajei quase 20 horas para poder chegar aqui, vindo da minha comunidade.
He traveled 20 hours to arrive from his community in the Amazon rainforest to come all the way to Paris to meet you all.
E ouvi dizer que aqui nós temos muita gente importante que pode nos ajudar nas lutas que nós estamos precisando, nessa luta global para o bem de toda a humanidade.
And he heard that there's a lot of important people here today that can really help this thematic, including globally.
Então, nós tratamos muito sobre os direitos humanos. Os direitos humanos são ações fundamentais para o bem viver, principalmente.
He considered that everything involved in human rights is very important for the survival of human people.
E eu venho de um povo que é um povo originário, como muitos povos que nós temos que são considerados indígenas, como muitos povos, mas eu venho de uma região muito cobiçada que é a região amazônica.
Especially for the regional people, how they used to call the local autochthonous indigenous people. And especially the Brazilian indigenous people come from a region that it's extremely on the eye of the people because it's very rich, especially his region as well.
Uma região onde nós tivemos que ser muito resistente para continuar existindo ainda hoje.
We had to resist a lot to be able to continue existing.
Só que com a luta hoje, com o progresso, com a modernização, isso tem nos colocado, enquanto liderança, muito preocupado com o futuro do nosso povo.
But the problem is the normal development, and in their leadership in his region, they are very worried about their future because, of course, their way of life is changing. The regions are developing, they have more and more contact with the white people.
Tem a região amazônica, a Amazônia Legal e a Amazônia no Brasil, tem recebido muitos investimentos, e esses investimentos têm levado muitos impactos para as nossas comunidades.
Well, the Amazon, you have to know that Amazon is a wilder name for 7 states in Brazil. And they've been receiving a lot of international investment that has some impact but not really the impact we would need to have.
E muita gente hoje tem sofrido com os impactos desses empreendimentos, como as mineração, por exemplo, como as hidrelétricas, como a intenção agora de fazer prospecção de petróleo na região amazônica. Isso precisa fazer um trabalho responsável, um trabalho que não tirem a vida das pessoas, tire a vida da biodiversidade.
So, there is a lot of Brazilian also investment in creating hydroelectric infrastructures, some mining, and those infrastructures are really dangerous and they're really bad for the communities because at the end of the day, they pollute the waters, they change the environment. And what he's pledging here is to make it, but make it in a conscious way that it would not really change their local environment.
E quando falamos dos direitos humanos, estamos falando da liberdade, estamos falando do direito de respeitar o jeito originário de não tá expulsando as pessoas, de não estar matando as pessoas.
So when he talks about human rights, he talks specifically about protecting the right of the local people to be there, because all those big investments are expelling the people from their regions, they're making the water to be polluted. So he talks specifically, it's respecting human rights, it's respecting the original people who've been living there peacefully since hundreds of years.
Então é muito importante respeitar esses princípios dos direitos humanos, respeitar os princípios fundamentais das pessoas e também não só do ser humano, como a biodiversidade no modo geral.
Not only respect the human rights of the human beings, but also about the all biodiversity of the region.
On that, I want thank you for sharing incredible perspective. I wanted to understand how you think the experience and perspective of the Hunikui people can help us achieve a new vision for how we live with nature and harmony.
Você acha que a experiência do seu povo pode influenciar ou ajudar a essa visão?
Bom, nós, como eu falei, nós somos um povo que nos consideramos que mais de 90% dos conhecimentos ancestrais dos nossos antepassados nós mantemos hoje dentro das nossas comunidades.
So we consider that 90% of our knowledge, it comes from our ancestral knowledge. We resist a lot to maintain them.
O modelo de governança hoje do povo Runicuim é um modelo que respeita a natureza, é um modelo que respeita o mundo invisível também, que nós chamamos a conexão espiritual. Nós ainda mantemos muita relação com as medicinas tradicionais.
Our social world, the way we still living, we respect our biodiversity, but also a lot what we call the spiritual world, because they feel the nature, so they have still a contact with the spiritual world of the nature.
E esse modelo de conexão,
and this power of connection,
é o modelo que a humanidade está precisando. Muita gente está distanciando da sua ancestralidade, da sua espiritualidade, voltado para capital de grande escala.
Which is absolutely correct. Say most of the people they distanced themselves about this contact with the spiritual world, with the nature world, basically in big cities. So it's very important to restore this contact with Mother Nature and with the nature, with the spiritual world of the nature.
Hoje, por exemplo, nós estamos trabalhando para poder fazer a regeneração, ajudando na regeneração de florestas que foram destruídas.
What they're doing now in his tribe, they work in our reforestation, because a lot of forest was deforested in the past years, and now they're doing a project to replant the trees and reforest the region.
Como a proteção de nascentes de água, como o repovoamento de peixe, de animais. Então, manter esse equilíbrio que é um modelo de governança que nós fazemos no nosso território, e isso nos está mais do que comprovado que no nosso território pode se manter um equilíbrio. Então, são experiências que podem ajudar a outras pessoas que não trabalham dessa maneira.
So basically, they are trying to restore the balance in his region, because not only the forest was destroyed and they're replanting, but there's a lot of water sources. And these water sources, they're bringing the fish again, because they have to rebuild the balance, the original balance that was lost, and they're recreating that again.
E nós queremos ajudar. Os nossos conhecimentos ancestrais têm muito como contribuir para uma mudança, para um mundo melhor. Porém, poucas pessoas querem ouvir. Poucas pessoas têm interesse de saber sobre esses conhecimentos tradicionais.
So what he says is that very few people is interested in hear about their ancestral knowledge. Most basically, they're more interested in explore their land than to hear the ancestral knowledge. And this link is missing. More people being open to listen and to learn from their ancestral knowledge.
Thank you, Kaisike. And you mentioned already the international investments, this kind of thing. Of course, this year, COP30 is coming to the Brazilian Amazon in Belém. There are, of course, many different perspectives on this, controversies. I'd love to know what is your, you and your people's take on this development in the region.
O que você acha que vai acontecer com a COP? Porque ele falou que durante a COP vai ter muita especulação de investimento, mas qual é a sua visão? O que você acha que pode ser um bom resultado da COP?
Bom, a COP eu já venho acompanhando desde a Rio+20, todas as COPs. Há grandes debates. A COP não deixa de ser um espaço muito importante para os povos do mundo inteiro, discutir estratégia de poder combater as mudanças climáticas como é um dos principais objetivos.
He joined the previous COP and he thinks it's still a very important meeting that globally people can meet and discuss strategies to mitigate climate change.
Mas eu acredito que ainda, durante as COP, ainda não foi acertado um modelo de fato que tenha ações afirmativas com resolutividade para os problemas que nós estamos enfrentando.
But for his experience, during all the COPs, they couldn't find a solution, a general solution to really aggregate and mitigate the real problems we are confronting in climate change. It's not yet there.
A COP30 no Brasil, por exemplo, já está sendo reconhecida como a COP de poder firmar as negociações feitas nos anos anteriores, principalmente com a intenção de poder explorar a região amazônica ou preservar a região amazônica.
So what you're expecting at this COP is to sign previous agreements that haven't been signed yet and find a way to exploit the Amazon, but in a sustainable way.
Mas é um pouco improvável que isso aconteça, porque as mudanças positivas não têm acontecido. Há muitos financiamentos, há muitos investimentos voltados para a região, para a preservação da região amazônica. Porém, todos os anos, nós, na nossa comunidade, presenciamos fatores diferentes, como muito desmatamento, muitas queimadas, muitas inundações.
Basically, there's been too much talk about nothing, because people have been talking about protecting the Amazon, but what he's been witnessing in the last years is every time it's getting worse and worse. So they talk about protecting, but it's not really what is happening. They keep deforesting, cutting a lot of trees. They are doing infrastructure and constructions that are really not helping the local people. So it's been a lot of talk, but very little specific action.
E os líderes mundiais têm uma oportunidade de fazer a diferença na COP30.
Well, he's expecting the world leaders to really try to make a difference in COP30.
De construir verdadeiramente ações
to truly build actions,
que vai ter ações efetivas,
effective actions,
para proteger a Amazônia e mudar muitas coisas no planeta.
to protect the Amazon and, by the way, helping many other things in the planet.
Ou pelo contrário, vai ser mais uma COP sem verdadeiramente ter soluções.
Or eventually it's going to be another COP without any truth and real solution.
Yeah, thanks for speaking that reality so forcefully. How can legal systems truly protect indigenous land and rights? I know you speak a lot about that. What is missing at the moment?
O sistema legal pode realmente ajudar a proteger. E aqui você podia também comentar o trabalho da FUNAI, porque a gente tem um sistema legal no Brasil que eles não sabem, né? Como que você vê o sistema legal podendo ajudar e proteger a causa indígena e a proteção da Amazônia?
Bom, nós temos muitos marcos legais. O Brasil é um país que se tem muitas leis de proteção.
Well, actually in Brazil, we have many protection laws, very strong protection laws.
Porém, é pouco respeitado essas legislações que nós temos.
But unfortunately, they're still not being fully respected. The legal aspect is there, but they're not being fully respected.
Nós temos a Constituição Federal do Brasil, que reconhece os direitos dos povos indígenas. É muito claro, já reconhece esse direito dos povos indígenas.
Well, Brazil has a long history in recognizing the legal rights of the indigenous people and the demarcation of their legal land.
Nós temos a Declaração das Nações Unidas sobre os direitos dos povos indígenas, que também já garante esses direitos.
We also have the United Nations Declaration of the Original Indigenous People that guarantees, entre guillemets, those rights.
E a própria Declaração dos Direitos Humanos, que também garante e reconhece os direitos dos povos indígenas.
Even in the chart of the human rights, they recognize and they guarantee the rights of the indigenous people.
Porém, muitos outros marcos legais, nacional e internacional, para poder verdadeiramente proteger, tem que efetivar, tem que ser respeitado essas leis que não são
But
na atualidade.
basically, to be able to protect, they have to respect those laws. They have to effectively respect those laws.
Então, eu acredito que hoje os marcos legais jurídicos que nós temos já seria suficiente, porém precisa ser respeitado, precisa ser efetivado verdadeiramente.
He believes that with all the laws that are already existing, if we just respect them, would be sufficient. Starting to respecting the laws that are already there.
Mais um exemplo muito bom. Num painel anterior se falava da lei do ecocídio. É uma estratégia que eu apoio essa luta de reconhecer esse marco legal jurídico para poder ter mais um mecanismo jurídico de proteção. E efetivando esse modelo, eu acredito que nós vamos começar a fazer algum modelo de proteção de algum bem sagrado da natureza.
Like in the previous panel that he spoke about Ecocide, he believes that a legislation like that would be really important and be helpful to reaffirm the need of protection.
Thank you, Kaisike, for sharing, that we have the frameworks, the laws, the tools. It's now about respecting them, putting them into action. Our time is slowly coming to a close, so I'm going to invite you, if you have one final call to action for the people in the audience today.
Bom, eu tenho um tema que eu sempre digo que poucas pessoas querem ouvir, mas que para mim é muito importante poder. Eu levo essa mensagem no mundo inteiro.
This is a message I send every time I travel. I try to give to the world that it's very important for me, but maybe very few people want to listen.
Muitas pessoas estão esfriando o seu amor, estão desconectando da sua espiritualidade.
Many people are disconnecting from their spirituality and losing the deep love they have inside.
E a gente precisa reaquecer isso. Nós precisamos trabalhar uma nova reeducação para a humanidade.
And we really have to reconnect with that and work for a new reputation for humanity.
Essa reeducação da união,
The reputation of unifying.
porque nós acreditamos, enquanto povos indígenas, que somos considerados indígenas, nós acreditamos que vai reinar a paz no mundo outra vez quando todos os povos reunirem novamente.
Our people believe that we're going to have peace in the world again when every single people would be able to reunite
Isso
and connect.
só vai acontecer quando
They believe that is gonna happen.
todo mundo entender que a espiritualidade é um dos pontos mais principais para a vida, seja humana ou não humana.
But he believes it's only going to happen when human beings are going to remind that spirituality is the most important key part of human existence.
Muito obrigado.
Merci. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Obrigado. Muito obrigado. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. So, as many of you know, final word, ChangeNOW falls 10 years this year from the Paris Agreement. I'll close with a quote from Cristiana Figueres. The law does not have to be a reflection of our basest interest, but can be an expression of our highest aspirations. Let's do that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.